Welcome to the July Carrier's Edge webinar, Inside Risk Assessments. I'm Mark Morell, President of Carrier's Edge, and I'm joined today by Michael Miller, our Director of Marketing, who's going to do all of the hard work of keeping me in line, and our guest today, Stephen Bojan from Sentry Insurance. Welcome, Stephen. Thanks for joining us today.
Mark, thank you, Mark and Michael. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a session that I've been wanting to do for a while, and it actually originated back at our Best Fleets to Drive For conference that we did in March. That was a really good event sharing all of the information that we collected through the Best Fleets to Drive For program in the previous year. And Stephen was one of the guest speakers we had at this event, and he did an excellent presentation talking about the overlap between insurance risk assessment or fleet risk management and workplace culture, which was a really nice fit for the audience there. But there was one slide that really stuck out to me, and I've got a screenshot of it here that I'm going to bring up. So this was the slide that really did it for me, because this slide I looked at and I thought, this is quite fascinating, because people always think about, insurance coming in and they look at the loss runs. Everybody sort of knows that they look at the loss runs, sort of the past year. But this idea that you can sort of figure things out, within a month, within a week, within an hour. There's other things that pop up that are really worth paying attention to. And I thought that was a really nice way of approaching it, because it gives you kind of a template of things to start watching for at different points, and to see whether you're on the right path, whether you've got the things that you need, or whether you've got potentially problems down the road. So what I thought we would do is kind of start with this, and I'm going to kill this now so that I can have a conversation. And so, Stephen, let's start with, sort of take us through your slide and the things that you're thinking there in terms of, the 1 month, the 1 day, the things that sort of come out there. And then what I want to do is drill down after that into the things that you notice really quickly. So what are the things that you see that are happening sort of a month after looking at a fleet, or the first day, some of those early experiences that you see people having?
What you see there is part of it is that different people, different constituencies or stakeholders have different views. Obviously, losses take longer to develop, and that's, everybody talks about losses, but losses take much longer to develop, and that's why we're at a year there. When we talk about a driver in that month, what we're really talking about is that's where you see operationally somebody who's kind of, you walk in, hopefully everybody walks into a new organization and thinks very positively. But you see those aches and pains, the challenges with dispatch, if there's payroll issues, if there's a lot of wait time. That's what you see at that month point. So you're really seeing operational. And then we talk about at the day level, where an executive, he's looking at the financials. He starts out with the financials, then he walks through the office and can kind of size up people in management, and can kind of see, if he walks into driver orientation, you get an idea. And it's pretty quick, because you just, it doesn't, one of the things that's often said is first impressions mean everything, and they really do. And they're very telling. The thing about when we talk about kind of that overall culture, which is where you're getting to, is that you can't, at the end of the day, you can't hide it. It permeates, because trucking is out in the public. There's tons of variables. You can't put it in a corner. It's out there, and everybody is out there, because it's a very interrelated organization. A trucking organization, from small to the biggest fleet, is got a lot of interrelationships between dispatch and drivers and safety and customers. It's that constant give and take. And then you have the safety folks. I think I have myself at an hour.
Hmm.
And, you look at some of the safety data, you look at the documentation, you're talking about the history of the organization. We'll get a little more into that, obviously. And you really kind of look and see how much they are, where safety fits within the cornerstones of that organization, and, what the command of these metrics. And that's huge. And then I have that 10-minute point there for, safety people among themselves, if you're maybe a little more confident than I am. And the reality is, you sense when you meet the people, how, how much value is that fleet putting into meeting with the representative of the insurance company, and who are they putting forth. And, we'll talk later about best practices. And I always say this to everybody, which is, put your best foot forward. If you can't put your best foot forward in 10 minutes, we've got it figured. It's not hard to see what's going on, because, this is safety should be the top priority for any motor fleet, really for any organization. Is, I would say our goal is to get people home in the same or better condition than they started their day. And really, that's, if that's not front and center, and you can't communicate that, then you're thinking there's some other things here, and I'm going to be digging deeper, and I have some serious concerns.
So you touched on a couple of things that I think are really interesting there. So I want to go through them a little bit. Uh, you know, One of them, one of my broader questions that I sent you in advance, and you sort of touched on it here, is what are the things that you look at, when you go into a fleet? What are the first things that you notice? And I think that was in that kind of first hour or so that you said, you can start seeing it about what they're doing. And what you touched on is really documentation and organization. Like, does the fleet have its house in order as far as having the files that they should have organized the way they should be in a way that's a readable fashion for you? Can you actually look at what's going on in there? So, is that one of the things that jumps out to you when you're starting to evaluate a fleet?
Absolutely. I mean, it's, compliance is table stakes. You need to be compliant and follow the regulations. Too often organizations think, well, wow, we have a great compliance program. Well, you should. This is the law. I
What
mean,
you want, a
that's
cookie? Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, when we look at these things, we're really saying, okay, uh, how do you, and then, having these things in place. And where I often like to, throw my spin on it, is the science of compliance to the art of safety. How are we using these basic building blocks to build a safer organization? And that's where the art comes into play, which is, you know identifying your at-risk drivers, identifying areas that are somewhat of a challenge, and marshaling and putting your resources there. I would go even a step, further, in the insurance world. And when people are looking at, talking about insurance renewals, everybody talks about CSA scores and the CAB report, which is a Central Analysis Bureau, which is really an in-depth analysis of online safety data and other of online available data about fleets. And really, when we look at that, and a safety person, an insurance person, is looking at that before they walk in the door. And, again, there's uh, the easiest thing is you look at, oh, they have alerts. Well, there's a problem. But more important is looking at what are the violations there, and and this will go to the heart of your question, which is, are these one-offs or systemic issues? Um, when I think of violations that are bigger indicators of system-related issues, are tires and wheel violations, and headlights. That's, people aren't doing good pre-trips. And
Hmm.
are we training on that? Are we holding our drivers accountable? Then we get to false log violations, the 11 and 14-hour violation, or in Canada, 13-hour violation. drivers out on a suspended license, things where you can put there are required systems, which would be an ELD, which is required in North America, based
Mhm.
for almost all fleets. If you're paying attention, if you're using the tools that you're required to use in an effective manner, you can eliminate a lot of these. And then it goes to what you were saying about policies and procedures, having policies in place that limit or eliminate the use of personal conveyance and really, tracking that, because that's where everybody, that's where not everybody, but a lot of drivers get themselves into trouble on the road is the use of personal conveyance for any number of reasons, some legitimate, often nefarious. And it's really important to when we talk about these policies and procedures, these are really the building blocks, again, of the organization. And what again, I'll call it a baseline of knowledge for a new driver. So when we come back as a fleet to that driver and say, you had a problem, I can point to, here's the policy, and here was the training we went to, and what you should have done better, or you shouldn't have done at all. And I would throw one more in there, on the CSA side, but again, from a system, it is substance abuse.
Mhm.
These are things that, in my opinion, should just never happen. There should never be alcohol. Everybody should know that, these are the things that aren't allowed. And there's very good reasons why. There's a lot riding on your tires on the road. And
Mhm.
there's also a lot of liability. We have a lot of responsibility, and I guess I'll move away from liability. We have a lot of responsibility to the motoring public. Getting a DOT authority, it is really a privilege, and
Mhm.
we need to make sure that we protect that privilege. So
Hmm.
I think those are going back to the policies and procedures. It really allows you to kind of point, even for a small fleet, to just be able to show where to the drivers, this is important to us. I work for Sentry, which is a large insurance organization, and I'll often point to substance abuse training that I'm sorry, harassment training we're responsible for doing every year,
Mhm.
as every big company does. Well, I can't remember exactly what was in that training, and really a lot of the modules within Carrier's Edge, I can't remember what was exactly there, but I know it was important to the organization. And so this is why I conduct myself in the way I do.
Mhm. Now, you touched on a couple of really good things there that I just want to reiterate for
Sure.
the benefit of the audience. One is that you're not just looking, we started this section with sort of, are you looking at the documentation and do they have their house in order and how easy is it to read through it? But you're looking at the violations, and it isn't just looking at total count of violations. You're looking underneath those violations at what types they are and what they
Mhm.
tell you beyond the violation itself. And definitely there are some, like you said, that are one-offs and some that are indicative of more systemic problems. So kind of the takeaway, I guess, for the fleets is look at your violations and see, is it things that are indicative of system problems, like what you're talking about with the people doing bad pre-trips and the violations that those lead to, and people that are not clear on substance abuse policies and like any of those kind of things. So as a fleet, don't just say, oh my God, we've got violations, we're done. Look at it in terms of what kind of violations and what are those violations telling you. And from there, plan your interventions accordingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's that idea of continuous improvement,
Hmm.
which is really what safety
Yeah.
is working to perfection, which we'll probably never get to, but it's a very laudable goal, and that's where we need to be.
Hmm. Now, you mentioned ELDs a minute ago, and that was one of the things that I had on my list to kind of look into a little bit more. And one of the questions that came in was related to that as well about do you recommend fleets, or how do you recommend fleets use that data as part of their safety programs, or what can they do with that to position themselves better when it comes to the insurance side?
Well, first and foremost is, making sure that drivers, all drivers and all management understands the rules of hours of service. They, depending on how you explain them and how you use them, they can be a little complex,
Hmm.
but that they understand, and that then from there to understand the expectations of the organization, whether it is we're going to push the limits or, really the idea of hours of service is not limit your hours, it's to manage fatigue
Mm.
and to make sure that you're doing a good job of that. And really, when we look at the ELD, it provides a treasure trove of information on hours of service as to where drivers take their breaks, where they're going, and how they're using their time, which is really important. And you can tell a lot about how a driver manages their time by watching their trips. And really, it's a great opportunity to do some coaching in general, and more specific if folks are near pushing the limits and or going over, whether it's the required 30-minute break, the 11 hours of drive time, the 14 hours, is, there's a lot of ways to educate and coach. Obviously there's online training, there's in-person coaching, and it's just making sure over time that this doesn't become a habit, because if you have folks who are pushing these things, it's a problem. The other thing along these lines, we talk about, I'm kind of focused on the regulations, but the behavior side is what's causing people to be pushing these. Are they spending too much time in a truck stop? Is it, that they're procrastinating and then rushing at the end? I always tell my son, or my wife does anyway, is hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
Let's get to where we need to be so that we're not in a position that we're rushing, because mistakes, and let's say accidents, crashes is my preferred term, but bad things happen when we're in a rush. And so
Mhm.
if we can, do things in a much more timely fashion, we're going to have better outcomes.
Mhm. Okay. So when you go sort of building on that, when you're evaluating a fleet, are you spending a lot of time looking at telematics data or camera data or talking to the company about how they use that information? Is that part of your assessment?
Absolutely. How you use the data is critical. You know, the um, one of the complaints through the years about from fleet operators has been, if we have the video or we have the data about that driver, somebody can use it against us. The reality is, this is your chance to be proactive, uh, to have data to see how somebody operates the vehicle in real time. And what we're looking to do is see what type of corrective actions are you taking with that driver. Are in terms of the driver facing camera, which is, you can really tell a lot of great things about, use of handheld cellular devices, other distractions while driving. Is there some kind of fatigue issue? And outward too, you see, are people keeping their lanes? Are they doing the right things, while driving? Do they use it? You can also turn signal while changing lanes. There's a lot of great tools there. And then there's that speed management, and acceleration, hard braking, that really, these are, and the question we always have is, so what did you do about it after the fact? We want to start with that have that discussion. And I always want to hear a fleet say, we start with training and then we move to discipline, because we want to start with the carrot. We want to start with best practices, make sure that folks have those tools and that they're, reminded about those tools. And then after a couple of occasions, that, at that point, we're going to pull out the stick and a decision needs to be made. I'll give a great example. I was thinking about a company. This is many years ago, way before my time at Sentry. I was with a client, and they had a driver who rolled the truck 4 times. It was it was a garbage truck actually.
Okay.
And I said, what, after the second time, did you really, was there like an indication that this person is a serious issue? I mean, maybe retraining the first time, but, again, it's that, um, but it drives a lot of other things. As one of the things you mentioned earlier, it's not just loss runs, but that drives a loss run right there. And then it tells us that, are they really doing a good job in that case of watching to see, we're protecting ourselves because this person just doesn't have the right mentality to drive a large commercial motor vehicle.
Okay, yeah, really interesting. Really interesting. Yeah, you'd think that after the second roll that they'd be maybe thinking, we should do something different here. Yeah. Okay. So let's build on that a little bit. So you want to see what people have done with the data, which is great. And so technology is good for that. But does it have to be technology, or is it more about the process for you? Like some fleets will say, "Oh, the technology is great, but we can't afford to have all of that stuff on these trucks." Or we don't have time to sift through all of the data, or we don't have time to work with it. Particularly smaller fleets have those struggles. So, what things have you seen, or do you like to see that sort of address that challenge, maybe without the staffing and the cost?
Well, I think technology can, for smaller fleets, technology becomes a substitute for larger staff. You can use online training if you don't have enough time to
Hmm.
train in person, which is huge. And you can, in this day and age, you can assign very specific modules, which is nice,
Hmm.
and they're graded, and you can see the idea of, the really the top flight telematics programs have dashboards. So instead, the argument which you bring up and is often made is there's too much data. Well, this brings that data down to a very usable level, and you're really force ranking your drivers from a safety perspective. And I think in the business world, everybody uses the 80/20 rule, and it really applies to fleet safety management or fleet risk management too. 20% of your drivers cause 80% of your challenges. And if you can focus on that 10 to 20% and additional coaching and additional, just discussions and observations, and, that's where you can get your bang for your buck. And the cost is so minimal when you compare that to the cost of a person. I mean, look at whether it's online safety training or an ELD system is infinitely cheaper than paying somebody to do that in-person monitoring. And I mean, let's just go back one step. I'll date myself here for a minute. Back before ELDs, when you had paper logs, and you would spend hours upon hours looking at these to identify violations and other challenges. Now you have it in seconds,
Yeah.
and it's neat and it's organized, and it'll, the system will actually, present you with the drivers with violations. You don't even have to go searching for it. So you're saving so much in terms
Mhm.
of resources that I don't see a reason not to utilize this. And even with the video, I've worked with a lot. I worked for a large fleet that implemented, the video systems, and I can tell you, we had thousands of trucks on the road, and it paid two crashes. It paid for itself for the year,
Hmm.
and it was incredible. And again, beyond that, it's the plus of the telematics data, the video, and some other tools is their leading indicators, not lagging indicators. When you look at your loss data and you look at some of your online safety information, that's stuff that happened in the past. We're looking in real time and seeing where challenges are, and we can really, that's where you get the efficacy, you get the results, is in terms of identifying things and being able to point them out, um, right now. The best example I'll give, and I'll move for another question, is, ask somebody what they ate for lunch last Monday. You know,
Yeah.
it's that's they don't remember. So if we
Yeah.
can do something in almost real time,
Yeah.
it's really poignant.
Okay. So I'm sort of getting a sense of the things that you like to see or really don't like to see when you go into a fleet. And it's really more about that proactive plan of how are you using the data that's available to you to try and
Absolutely.
identify problems and work with those going forward. Yeah, that's great. But you mentioned paper logs, and I did want to ask about that. One of the things that I always find that tracking is kind of reluctant to move away from is physical paper. And people sort of cling to the paper, and they have they have the driver file that is a physical item, and they often tell me that they need that for insurance. And I often wonder about that. Like, do you want to see a giant stack of paper, or would you prefer to see these things kind of digitized in a system somewhere?
You know, digitize. I mean, I prefer the digitized because of organization, and it shows that people are forward thinking. As your organ For a small fleet, paper is fine. I mean, that's
Mhm.
when you have 12 or 14 or 20 trucks, it's relatively easy.
Sure.
As you grow and you scale, paper is almost impossible in this day and age just because of the voluminous amount. And again, the plus of effective electronic documentation today is with AI, you can be checking for issues almost automatically, and
Mm.
that's incredible, and that's what we're really looking for is the digitization of driver files and maintenance files. It can show if there are variances or problems, and again, it's that we can go and check them right away,
Hmm.
and look, and that's what we're really looking for. If there's a file and I ask to see it when I come out, or one of the consultants I work with comes out, you just print up the one file for the last year. We don't need to see, again, 18 files. So printing, one file is really a small amount of paper, and it simplifies. The cleaner the file is, the more we prefer it because it's easier to find what we're really looking for.
Ah, excellent. Okay. Um, And so that kind of leads into one of the other things that you mentioned right off the top that I wanted to follow up on. You mentioned one of the things you look at is who reps the company as far as in terms of your insurance, like who the company is putting forward to represent them when they deal with you. And that was an interesting one because it never occurred to me that they wouldn't be taking it seriously and putting senior people up front to work with you on that. So is that something that you see where people don't take it seriously and they'll have the wrong people representing them?
They don't take it seriously. They just don't realize that having the right person there who has the answers, or a group of people that have the answers we're looking for, is really important. When you go into a meeting and you say, so what lanes do you operate? And
Mm,
you bring in an outside safety consultant that says, I don't deal with operations. I can't give you that answer.
hmm
Um, that's not helpful. Or I don't know, or you have a safety admin versus the safety director who's going to talk a little bit more about the
mm,
holistic approach of the organization. Um, you know, it, it leaves gaps in questions. And the idea when you spend time with clients from an insurance standpoint, or really even a regulatory standpoint, if there would be an auditor, is we want to feel like we have the complete picture when we walk out the door,
hmm
and that the people that you're meeting with really know the safety program. They know what's driving their losses, what's driving their safety related issues, and that they're able to address them. I mean,
mm,
it's another great example is you meet with asking what's the history of your organization. I always ask, what's the history of your organization? Where did
Mm.
you start and how did you get here? And yeah, it's often, most often, it's an amazing story and it makes a lot of sense. But when somebody gives you a blank stare, you're sort of wondering either if you were coming in, this is sort of like an interview process. And it's, again, when you have that job interview, you better be prepared and know who you're interviewing with and know yourself because you're going to get asked. So let me talk about these jobs on your resume. Let's talk about the safety data that you have and
Mm.
really be comfortable with it. And then again, it's hoping that there's a positive thing. I remember I was once at I was at a meeting with an insurance carrier. Actually, I was on the brokerage side at that point. I've kind of been on all three: the broker, the trucking side, and the insurance side. And the our client actually brought in lunch. They catered lunch for the insurance company. They had all of their senior people sitting there. The insurance carrier had some pretty senior people sitting there, and on the brokerage side, we did too. They brought in lunch. We had this very positive discussion. There was a little bit of, there was some consternation in terms of some things, but boy, oh boy, did they do a great job of explaining everything, all of the losses, all of the programs they had, and really showing you folks are important and you're our partner. Because at the end of the day, that's really what insurance companies want is we become partners in your risk.
Mhm. Yeah, really good way of putting it. Well, it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about wanting to get a sense of whether or not this company takes it seriously. And kind of the sooner you can get the answers to your question, the more confidence you're going to have that they have their act together and when
Mm-hmm.
they say they take it seriously, they actually mean it. Because everybody says that when the insurance company is in front of them, but are they actually meaning it and delivering that afterwards when you go? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
So let's go in a little bit of a different direction because there's another question that I had sort of on my prep list that is something that you said to me a while ago that I think is a really interesting observation. And you said you've said this in the past that you find that driver turnover is one of the greatest indicators of loss or potential loss runs. There's a great connection between driver turnover and loss rates. So how do you see those connected, and what does it tell you when you look at those things?
Uh, it's indicative in a number of ways. First and foremost, when new drive, the one of the most likely times that a fleet driver is going to be in a crash is when they first start with an organization. And it's that lack of familiarity, it's that initial stress of the job, not knowing where they're going, not knowing the policies and procedures and some of the routes. So during that first 6 months to a year is the most likely time to be involved in a crash for a driver. Again, that lack of familiarity causes a lot of that, and the equipment they're driving. So as during the learning process, there's a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty. The other part of turnover is what's causing the turnover. I think there's two parts to this. One, a lot of times you see turnover is caused by not good hiring decisions. When you see that somebody had 6 jobs in the last 2 years, what makes anybody think that this driver isn't going to be leaving number 7 in short order? So making good hiring decisions, looking through that application and or resume and or PSP, the pre-employment screening program, is critical to identifying good people. And you kind of hire your turnover oftentimes. When you see somebody who is applying who's referred by one of your top drivers and was with his last organization for 7 years, you're like, this is a keeper. This is awesome. And the other part about turnover is drivers don't generally leave because of one big issue. It's the multiple issues, multiple operational issues that are problematic that cause drivers to leave. And if you have a lot of drivers leaving, it's generally these are some pretty serious issues. I mean, everybody can leave, you'll see those one-offs where people leave for this or that. But when you see a lot of people leaving an organization and going to somewhere else because the grass seems to be much greener, there's a reason. And it's, and this is an easy way to identify without having to sit for a day or two and really peel back the onion, where you can see maybe you don't see the underlying causes, but you definitely see the effects of some significant issues.
So that's one of those things that tells you that there are operational issues within the company that are likely going to lead to safety problems down the road.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Interesting. So, is it possible to have a fleet that has a really good safety record over an extended period that doesn't have a good workplace culture and good turnover?
It's always possible. I don't think it's likely.
Yeah.
You
It's a loaded question because I've
it is,
spent
but
years
I
telling
think
people it's basically impossible
it's
that you
almost,
can have a good safety record for a short term, but if you don't have a good culture and you don't have all of those pieces in place, that safety is not going to it's not going to last.
absolutely not. And I'll go back to the presentation I gave in Charlotte. At the end of the day, risk management is 90% hiring.
Hmm.
We're putting people out on the road in a environment with multiple variables that's very challenging. And this could be anywhere from a light duty vehicle to, uh, a 80,000 pound tractor trailer. And, we need to have people who can make good decisions. And, really, if they stick with you and the company provides that, people want to stay with winners. I mean, I think it's any organization and any type of organization. They want to stay with winners. Nobody wants to be in a place that's got a lot of negativity. And so, that really it shows over time. And again, that turnover rate is really a good indicator of that.
Mhm. Interesting. Okay. Um, I do want to make sure that I cover some of the other questions that came
Sure.
in advance. And for the audience, if there are questions that you have, certainly we can try and make sure we get those as well. You can use the Q&A option there. But there's a couple of questions that came in and I thought were kind of interesting, more than just the, what do you look for kind of thing. One was a question about mock audits. And we do see some people talking about this or espousing the value of doing a mock audit before your insurance comes in to prep. What are your thoughts on that? Do you see that as something that's valuable for people?
Well, we don't we call them compliance reviews today. I don't think anybody says mock audit anymore.
Yeah.
It's not a good term from a risk management standpoint or liability standpoint, but the reviews are very helpful.
Hmm.
Again, we do a lot of them ourselves at Sentry, where we help our clients, particularly our smaller ones, to review their compliance programs, because this is what we see every day, and we can communicate best practices and identify flaws in the program. And if for a larger organization, even doing it themselves or bringing an outside person is a great idea prior, I think where you're going with this, to the insurance company coming in, because really you don't want to have these significant gaps
Hmm.
prior to having a discussion with the insurance company. I know we work with some good sized fleets and we provide these services too, and the plus of doing it with the insurance company is that um, for most of those fleets, they have almost no problems. And they're just looking for that little nugget of improvement, and that says a lot. Again, it goes to that idea of culture and quality improvement, continuous improvement,
Hmm.
which is you see maybe you could look a little more closely at your use of uh, one of the things you could do is, did you think excuse me, I'm looking at thinking hours of service, but I'll use a better example. Did you look at using poll programs or continuous MVR monitoring? as part of your program for driver qualification files. And really, wow, they're like, thank you. And this is, something where we avoid that driver with a suspended license on the road because we've put this program in place. And identifying these gaps is, no matter how small, is really like a shows a commitment to quality that goes a long way. And nobody wants to be looking at a driver who was on the road for 20 hours last week. So it's a good idea
Mhm.
to have some of this done ahead of time.
And I guess along with that, document everything that you do. And if you find
Absolutely.
something that you're going to change, document what your outcome is and what your plans are. What did you do about it? Because you're going to want to see
Absolutely.
that. If somebody just tells you, oh, yeah, we had one of these reviews, or we do this review internally, if they have no evidence of it, then it's going to be hard for you to put much stock in it.
Absolutely. And one of the things that insurance companies often do when we send safety consultants out is we write recommendations. And we see that there's an area that should have improvement. We
Hmm.
document it. And then what we're looking for from our clients is to show documentation of what they did to improve. And it's a good practice, and it's that continuous communication. And I'll throw it a step further to looking at a more formalized DOT audit or a compliance review by the up in Canada, or down, by the MOT, or down in the United States by the FMCSA. And what they're going to ask if there are problems is that you show very formal and very detailed documentation of how you're improving. We're not going to change our rating until you really prove that you're doing something different, not just what you say and what you dream, but what you're doing and how you're doing it. And it goes a long way. And the more detailed you are, and the more copious your notes are, it really is a benefit.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, well, that's always seems to come down to what are you documenting and what evidence do you have of what's actually happening? Because we get these
Absolutely.
questions regularly from people that are evaluating our service, and they'll ask, "Am I going to get an insurance deduction if I sign up for this?" And my answer is always the same. Well, no. Why would you get an insurance break just because you signed up for a service? If you use the service and you show that you're doing something with it, then that's a different conversation. But it comes down to what you're actually doing, what you're documenting, what your plans are, and the evidence that you're actually doing something with that information, rather than just, saying that you've done something. You've got to be able to demonstrate it.
Absolutely.
Uh, Sorry, go ahead.
The best fleets are going to have some crashes.
Hmm.
I wish they didn't, but they do.
Yeah.
And when we talk about online training, when we talk about these other monitoring and use of ELDs and cameras, what we're looking to do is really minimize the likelihood to prevent the unsafe actions that that statistically lead to the serious collisions and to the losses. Now, there's some of them are still going to happen, but if we can stop 40 or 50% of them over time, it's just huge.
Hmm.
And that's really the goal here.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, another question that was kind of an interesting one. Are there any partnerships, certifications, or affiliations that help with insurance? Things that you like to see when you go in and evaluate a fleet? I hadn't really considered that one before, but are there any things in that area? Somebody has a certificate in one particular thing, or they're part of some group. Anything there that stands
Um,
out for you?
we at Sentry, we put a lot of value that safety directors and the safety professionals we work with, and our team too has the certification for the Certified Director of Safety, the CDS
Hmm.
designation,
Hmm.
which uh, takes a lot of work. Obviously, there's 4 days of classroom, and you have to put together a safety portfolio to show that you're committed to safety, and this is part of what you've been doing, which really shows a level of professionalism for that safety director. There's some other designations like the TRS designation, and, uh, which is transportation risk um, professional, um, which is uh, which is a nice designation. And so those are really important. Those are nice. And then again, what we like to see is folks who worked in safety, who've been around, that haven't just, when we ask uh, for somebody, I think the designations are good. And the other thing is, what is your experience and where have you come from? And I was a dispatcher and now I'm the safety director. That, you know, how, kind of how have you evolved into this position versus how did you get dropped into it?
Now, that also kind of leads to the discussion about, okay, you were a dispatcher and you got dropped into safety because nobody else was there. So now what are you doing about it? Maybe you didn't have a lot of experience before, but what are you doing to rectify that now? Are you taking courses? Are you
Mhm.
attending safety conferences? How are you learning about it? Are you part of these other safety groups, sort of peer groups? Uh, all of that kind of stuff sort of fits into the broader picture that gives you a bit of a sense of whether or not this is a serious organization or somebody who's likely to be a problem for you. Yeah.
It shows that commitment. I don't know. I mean, I hate to say problem only because it's, hopefully the people that they're bringing in are of good stock
Hmm.
and they take it serious. There's so many resources out there, including the safety folks from the insurance carriers. We have 8 consultants around the country that love to work with our clients and help them develop because some of our smaller fleets don't have the luxury to hire somebody with 20 years
Hmm.
uh, you know, of being a safety manager. But really, the opportunity to work with them, to be there, to ask questions. I'll give you my other semi-flip answer. Is there are times I'll sit with a group of people, and you're talking and maybe talking too much, but talking to them and giving some suggestions. And I always say I could be giving lottery numbers, and nobody's writing it down. And it's that opportunity to be that, to have good people who want to listen, who want to cooperate and want to learn. And,
Mhm.
when you sense that, obviously, it goes a long way when you're bringing somebody in who's maybe a little younger and a little more raw, but really wants to be that person and really has a commitment. And you're like, wow, I was like somebody who's got it going on and has a future doing this. You look much more. That's putting that. What I like to say is putting that. The best foot forward, and you go okay versus the one who's just kind of sitting there waiting for somebody to leave the room.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point that I think is worth reiterating for the audience in general is to take advantage of the resources from the insurance
Absolutely.
company. And I see so many fleets who it doesn't cross their mind, or they just see, your people like yourself and your peers as like the insurance police that are there to write up all the things they did wrong for the year and then make sure that they get shafted when renewal comes around. But that's not the case. I mean, maybe that was the
No.
case at some point in the past, but the insurance people, whether it's the broker or the insurance company, they've got all of these professionals whose job is to help the fleet be safer, share best practices, teach people the things they don't know, point out things where maybe somebody's got some blind spots, help with all of those things. They're a huge resource, and often it is very cheap or free. So
It is,
can't beat that.
and the other big plus I think for folks from the insurance, from the broker side is we work with so many organizations. We understand a lot of best practices and we've seen a lot of best practices, and we can scale our knowledge to the size of the organization we're working with so
Hmm.
that we're not going to tell 14 truck fleet, you need to be investing in
A
really you need
simulator.
yeah, you need to
Yeah.
be investing in a sim. That's a great one. I've seen
Yeah.
I saw that once for a 20 truck fleet, but you don't need to be investing in $100,000 driving simulator. But here are some
Yeah.
opportunities
Hmm.
to really do better. You don't need to create your own videos because here is
Hmm.
some videos that whether it's we have them or Carrier's Edge or they're on YouTube. Certain states like put out on distracted driving. These are really meaningful things that are available, and that's our goal. Is really we want to be. I mean, again, I can't stress enough. We're partners in this. At the end of the day, we succeed together or we don't succeed together. So, and our goal is to succeed. We want to all be in a situation where, uh, obviously, we want to be, losses lower, we make more money, but that
Mhm.
our customers are paying a very fair amount for their insurance because they're doing really a good job and reducing the risk that's out on the road.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left, and I want to ask one of the questions that I always find to be one of the more fun questions, and it usually leads into some interesting areas. What scares you most when you go into a fleet for the first time? What are the things that you're most horrified by?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't know that I'm horrified by anything at this point, but the concerns that I see or that are bigger than others are when there's a culture that needs a lot of improvement, when there aren't a lot of controls in place. Again, some of that is scalable by the size of the organization, but really it's about the that culture and having systems that are usable and that are being used. One of the other things that always makes me nervous is you look and you see policies that were printed off of Google Docs, and you're like, what does this have to do? A boilerplate policy that talks about flatbedding when they're a refrigerated carrier. It's those are things where it's like, have you put enough thought into what you're doing, and could we do better?
Hmm. Okay. Well, that's a very political answer, a very generous answer. We were doing a webinar a while ago with some other risk consultants, and they talked about how when they're going to do a review, they show up early and just sit in the parking lot and watch what's happening to see is the fleet kind of scrambling to get everything cleaned up and look nice before they show up, or is it already set up? Come early and see are they making everything safe? Are they cleaning up all of the risks, or is it just business as usual? And that can tell them a lot. So I always
Absolutely.
find that to be a good kind of question. What are the things that you look for that are going to be the most of a red flag? Yours are really good.
And going driving through the back of the lot is always help. You see somebody, you see sometimes the trucks that need a lot of repairs for some reason, strangely. And but really it's, we're going in with that positive attitude. And if I were to sit and really watch in the morning, to be frank, the two things I would look for are: one, are all the drivers wearing seatbelts as they're leaving the yard? And two, did they do good pre-trip inspections? And those would be the two most telling signs. I mean, the other most telling sign is how much duct tape is on the bumpers. But really those first two are so important. And that
Yeah.
goes to systems and best practices and the quality of your drivers.
That's interesting. You mentioned pre-trip a few times. So that seems to be like one of the most telling things about sort of the
Absolutely.
quality of the fleet.
Absolutely. Because it's discipline, it's a professional truck driver, and that's what we're looking for. I mean, if you want to go back like in time, you'd see the white knights of trucking, the bow tie, the hat, the uniform,
Mhm.
and just that pride in what they're doing. Obviously,
Mhm.
nobody wears uniforms anymore, or very few. But the just that pride in making sure that you're doing a good job, because one of the ways you ensure that your vehicle is safe is through that pre-trip inspection. I mean, it's you avoid system failures. When I do driver meetings, I always say, "What's the most dangerous place to be on the road?"
Mhm.
Answer: the shoulder.
Mhm.
How do you avoid being on the shoulder? You do a good pre-trip inspection.
Okay. But I guess it's also, I mean, it's not just about the professionalism of the driver, but it does go to your earlier points about the systems in place. Is the
Absolutely.
company training the drivers? Are they supporting them taking that half hour to do a good pre-trip? Or are they pressuring the driver to run anyway? Do they have a process for dealing with the defect and providing somebody with a replacement truck or trailer? Like all of those things go to operations, they go to maintenance, they go to the executive mindset. So I, there's,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay. So there's sort of the golden bit of wisdom is, yeah, get your pre-trips in order. Excellent.
It's it solves a lot of problems.
Hmm.
And again, it shows the dedication and the professionalism of the organization. And if I want to go a step in the other direction, it's also nice when somebody's out on the yard helping and monitoring to watch these things. And and oftentimes, you talked before about paperless systems. And with a number of the ELD programs that are available, you can do online pre-trip inspections and communicate instantaneously if there are deficiencies in the unit and kind of track what's going on, which is really huge. And if the system is set up correctly, it can really make for a much more seamless and efficient process.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's going to bring us to time. So thanks very much, Stephen, for sharing your wisdom. Some really good insights there. And for everybody in attendance, there will be a recording available, and we'll have Stephen's contact info included in that, so you can ask him if you have any follow-ups or want to learn more. But thanks everybody for attending, and thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Mark and Michael. You guys have a great, and thank you everybody for attending also, and have a great day. Be safe out there.
All right.